Hello, and welcome to Stories from India, a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I am your host, Narad Muni, and I'm a mythological character myself. I have the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So, the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. In this episode, we are doing a folk tale from Kashmir. We have done some Kashmiri folk tales before. You can check the links to those in the show notes. Today's story is about a husband and wife and their disagreement and some unplanned adventure. There are also no supernatural elements in the story, unless you include a cat that follows its owner's instructions. It's easy to see that whoever imagined this folktale never owned a cat. The story begins a few centuries ago in a little village with a merchant and his wife arguing about something. But wait a second, these were not the husband and wife that the story is about. They were arguing about their son. The disagreement was whether the son was completely foolish or was he just foolish 99% of the time. At this point, let's call the merchant's son Buddhu. As is usual on the show, I've named the characters based on the role they play in the story. And Buddhu is synonymous with being foolish. Though the merchant's wife would have disagreed because she did not think that her darling son was as foolish as her husband made him out to be.
I'm telling you, he's absolutely hopeless,
said the merchant.
Yesterday, I asked him to feed the chickens, and he made them some egg sandwiches. Can you imagine? Egg sandwiches. Poor chickens. They were so traumatized. I doubt that they will lay eggs for weeks.
Buddhu's mom shuddered. But it could have been worse, as she pointed out. He's a boy in a patriarchal society in medieval India. All we have to do is to get him married, and that's it. Let him just inherit all our wealth, and let's just hope that his children turn out to be smarter. But her husband did not agree. He said he didn't have any hope of finding a girl who would accept Buddhu for what he was. The merchant's wife kept telling him that he hadn't given his boy a chance. Finally, he agreed to one last test. If the boy failed at this task, she would never bring up the topic of either marriage or inheritance. If he succeeded, well, there was no chance of that. But if he did, the merchant would help him find a bride and also arrange some capital so Buddhu could set up a business of his own. Buddhu's mom agreed. It was no big deal for her. She knew that she could always get her husband to change his mind. Though she did get a little worried when her business-minded husband insisted on their agreement being recorded on stamp paper, with witnesses and everything. When she signed, the merchant was very happy. Rubbing his hands with glee at finally being able to secure his own nagging free future, he got to work. He summoned his son immediately and gave him his assignment. He handed Buddhu 3 copper coins. Buddhu's goal was to spend them. That's it? Asked the lad.
Not quite, said his father. There are some conditions. Buy whatever you want with the first coin. That's totally up to you. You can throw the second coin into the river.
Buddhu nodded. Even someone as foolish as him could understand such simple instructions. His father continued,
Then, with the third one, buy me some stuff.
What stuff? Asked Buddhu, which was a good question to ask.
Buy me something to eat, something to drink, something to chew on, and something to sew, and something to feed the cows.
With just 1 copper coin? Buddhu asked, surprised. How was he going to get all that? But he didn't object. A parent's word was law. Or so he was taught. The next day, he had a bit of a challenge. But not from the first coin. He bought himself a hearty breakfast of parathas from a local seller. Centuries ago, you could certainly get a hearty breakfast for a single copper coin. Buddhu headed to the river to reluctantly execute the second of his father's instructions. But he hesitated. He worried that if he cast the coin into the river, sure, he would have followed his father's instructions. But then, how was he going to buy all the stuff that his father had asked for? Conflicted about whether or not to actually toss the coin in the river, Buddhu made the motion a few times and withdrew at the last second. It was at this time that a young woman observed him. She was about his age, and she was the ironsmith's daughter. She questioned him, and he explained his dilemma. How was he going to manage to get something to eat, something to drink, something to chew on, something to sow in the ground, and something to feed the cows? He didn't know how much milk cost and what he could do to feed it to the cows. The girl, whom I'm going to call Chatur, face-palmed at this point. What was the education system for the rich coming to, if people weren't even learning the basics? She thought. She herself had the most basic education. Her school was her home, and her parents were her teachers. But she knew right away how to solve this problem. She decided to help the fellow out. She thought this was intergeneration rivalry. To her, it seemed that Buddhu's parents were demonstrating a lack of confidence in his generation, and not just a lack of confidence in him alone. Okay, let's show these boomers, she said. First thing, don't throw away the second coin. But then, I'd be directly disobeying my father's instructions, Buddhu protested. Don't worry about it. He's secretly hoping that you don't actually throw away the coin. He's a businessman, the girl explained. Buddhu agreed, reluctantly. Now, for the third coin, go buy a watermelon, Chatur said. You should be able to get a decent-sized one in the marketplace for a single copper coin. Buddhu stared blankly. Truth be told, this was the first time in the story he showed signs of being foolish. So then, Chatur explained that the watermelon checked all the boxes. It had juice to drink, pulp to eat, it could be chewed on, the shell could be fed to a cow. He just had to make sure to not get the seedless variety, so that he could then sow those seeds as well. Buddha realized that that was brilliant, and so he acted on her advice. He went home and showed his parents the watermelon, presenting it as if it was his own idea. Buddhu's mom had tears in her eyes, amazed that her son had done something brilliant after all. Buddhu's father was still skeptical, so he pressured his son into admitting the truth. Buddhu's mom pointed out to her husband that irrespective of the fact that he had help, Buddhu had actually performed the task. That meant it was time to print some wedding invitations. When Buddhu's father pointed out that in order to do that, they needed a girl for Buddhu to marry, the mom suggested Chatur. And why not? She had already proved that she could support him. That was, in Buddhu's parents' minds, the only qualification of a wife in medieval India. Buddhu's parents met up with Chatur's parents and arranged their marriage. Chatur's parents thought they lucked out. An ironsmith's daughter marrying into a significantly higher economic class? What was not okay about that? And Chatur did not object either. And so the two were married. Everything was fine up until this point. But this is where Buddhu's foolishness emerged. The lad listened to too many of his friends, and those friends were resentful of the fact that he was marrying someone considerably poorer than himself. They advised that the only way to make up for it was for him to systematically crush her spirit and all power of independent thought. So Buddhu put his plan into action right away. On their wedding night, he asked her to do all the dishes. Considering that there had been 100 wedding guests, there were a lot of dishes to be done. Maybe they should have used paper plates or something. I don't even know where they got those 100 plates and dishes from. But whatever, I shouldn't judge. We divine creatures are known for some excesses as well. For example, you see how we can never have enough hands and heads. Everyone's got 4 or 6 or 8. Anyway, I'm digressing. Chatur had anticipated Buddhu's plan when she saw her new husband chatting with his friends earlier in the day. It wasn't hard to guess. Buddhu's so-called friends were pointing fingers at her and scrunching their noses. To get out of dishwashing duty, Chatur said that the most terrible things would happen if she did any work in the house the first week of their marriage. Besides, they had enough help. They had kitchen maids and dishwashing boys. What terrible things? Asked Buddhu suspiciously. Obviously, I don't know, said Chatur. This is superstition, meaning it's very abstract and ambiguous, so that I can claim to have been right no matter what happens. Somehow, Buddhu bought that argument and decided to wait until the eighth day. Chatur cleverly did not disclose the fact that there was another tradition, which was that after the first week, brides would visit their parents' home. When that visit sneaked up on him, and his own parents wholeheartedly supported it, Buddhu felt he had been cheated out of a spirit crushing opportunity. This wasn't fair at all, he thought. He contemplated visiting his in laws and crushing his wife's spirit right there. But then something else came along, an offer from his parents. Buddhu's mother had reminded her husband of his promise to provide some capital and set up their son with a business of his own. Buddhu's father did this reluctantly, especially given that the brains behind his son's success were on leave at the moment. But he gave his son a ship, some money, some fidget spinners to sell. He chose the kind of fidget spinners that were in high demand and most likely to net a profit, even for someone as foolish as Buddhu. Well, the part about getting a lot of customers quickly went according to plan. Buddhu had sailed to a neighboring country and set up his pop-up boat store at the local harbor market. But then Buddhu kept making basic mistakes and kept accidentally haggling down the price instead of up. Soon, word got around that there was a merchant selling his fidget spinners for practically nothing. But because Buddhu had a limited amount of fidget spinners after that point, he still made a profit rather than a complete loss. At that point, some of his own customers suggested that they sell back his fidget spinners to him so that he could meet the demand. Thankfully for Buddhu, the police came by to see what the commotion was. They had heard that someone was selling fidget spinners here at throwaway prices, probably stolen goods. Just to be clear though, the police said, they weren't here to investigate, so he could put away his license and registration and city permit and all that. They just wanted to see if he had any more fidget spinners left to sell. But Buddhu hadn't any left, so the crowd reluctantly dispersed, some of them upset at having missed this buying opportunity. A couple of those decided that this was a good business model that might work in the future. And that is how Black Friday and Amazon Prime Day originated. Or so the rumor goes. But let's cut back to Buddhu, who by now decided to grow his money even further. He knew how to. He was an accomplished gambler, or so he thought. He went to the closest gambling establishment and played with the local poker expert. He lost all his money. The local poker expert, whom we can call Kapati, had a cat that she had trained very well. The cat would sit on its perch and have a perfect view of everyone's cards. She would move her tail in a very well-rehearsed pattern that would convey to Kapati what cards her opponents were holding. Very often, the other card players, not suspecting anything, would actually applaud the cat for what they thought were tricks it was playing with its tail. Like I said before, the shocking part here is not that Kapati got her cat to understand and execute a complicated sequence of tail movements to convey information of up to 52 cards. The shocking part here is that Kapati got her cat to do anything at all, as any cat owner will attest. Anyway, Kapati and her cat soon cleaned out Buddhu's profits, after which he gambled his boat and quickly lost it. He next put up some secret reserve money that he promised he had stashed on the boat. There really was no reserve money. Buddhu was just being overconfident. He was sure he would win the next round, despite having absolutely nothing to back up his confidence. So when he lost again, and the money was not found on the boat, Buddhu was put in jail. And he suffered in jail. The jailers were mean to him, and so were the other prisoners. They wouldn't let him join in on their game of cricket, and the conversation would always run dry the moment he joined any of them. There were murderers, burglars, and perpetrators of violent crime. They were all ashamed to be seen in the company of Buddhu. Buddhu didn't even know how to be a proper criminal. One day, though, as Buddhu was morosely staring out of the prison gates, he saw a traveler passing by. Buddhu called out to him, and upon learning that the man was from his home country, he pleaded with him to take 2 letters. Postage paid, and not at all heavy. He had just have to drop them at the closest post box when he got back to their home country. Now, the 2 letters were to his wife and to his father. But Buddhu had accidentally switched the letters and envelopes. So his father was puzzled why Buddhu had addressed him as his sugar plum. The rest of the letter was filled with glowing details about how much money he had collected and the palace he was staying in, as a personal guest of the king. All made up stuff so that Chatur wouldn't think any less of him. But Chatur got the letter intended for his dad, where Buddhu spilled all the beans and asked for immediate assistance in paying off his loans to Kapati and bailing him out of jail. Please, he said, many times in the letter. The jail food was so bad, he described. The parathas were not perfectly circular as he was used to. And instead of slightly chilled lassi, they served it at room temperature. He couldn't take it anymore. Chatur sighed. It was up to her again to save the day. But there was a limited amount of stuff that she could accomplish in that neighboring country, where people were even more misogynistic than what she was used to. So she disguised herself as a man. Once she did that, everyone she met on her journey was courteous and offered her food, drink, and shelter. All free of charge, of course. Chatur had found out everything that she wanted about how Kapati won her games. Chatur had needed to spend some money to bribe a bunch of people. But she was happy to do that with the money she had borrowed from her father-in-law. But she had nothing to worry about. She was going to win it all back from Kapati. That might remind you of Buddhu's confidence going into a game with Kapti. But there was a difference between her confidence level and that of Buddhu's. She had intelligence. Knowing what Kapti's cat would do, Chatur was prepared. Right at the beginning, when the cards were distributed, Chatur let something out of her sleeve. It was a mouse that she had cleverly concealed. That caught the attention of the cat pretty quickly. It leveled the playing field. And a level playing field was enough. Because as it turned out, Kapati was a pretty bad card player when she wasn't cheating. Within a few minutes, she had lost everything to Chatur, including the ship, the debt that she held, and a bunch of other things. With that, Chatur got not just Buddhu, but a bunch of other prisoners out of jail. Buddhu did not recognize his own wife in her disguise. Chatur told all the men that she had released that she needed a crew to sail back home in a ship that she had just won. They all volunteered. Buddhu seemed indecisive until she offered to name him captain of the ship. He agreed eagerly because that meant he would also make a decent pile of money to show his wife and maintain some superiority over her. The only things Chatur asked Buddhu for were some specific and key pieces of evidence, including his prisoner clothes with name labels, his frequent gambling card at Kapati's establishment, Kapati's sworn affidavit, and records of his cancelled debt. It's not much of a story after that. Buddhu returned home on a handsome salary befitting the captain of a ship. Chatur disappeared, but then welcomed him at home with open arms. Chatur had told herself that she would forgive and forget and move on. But Buddhu just had to continue with his domineering attitude. It was infuriating when he especially began to brag about all the money he made. But it got worse when he began ordering Chatur about, asking her to do menial household chores. That got Chatur's goat. She politely waited to see if he would stop. But Buddhu continued. And what's more, he had the effrontery to do it in front of his parents. Chatur herself had been wiser and had avoided exposing him in front of his fellow prisoners. Chatur stopped Buddhu mid-sentence and revealed everything. And with all the carefully collected evidence, it wasn't hard for Buddhu's parents, and indeed Buddhu himself, to see what a fool he had been. But he had brought it upon himself. That's about it for the story. If you're looking for a moral, there are many. Don't try to rule over someone who got you out of a pickle, no matter what your friends tell you. Somehow in the story, despite all that, Chatur was content to continue on with Buddhu. With her talent, she could have made millions. The word Buddhu means foolish, and Chatur means clever, and Kapati means cheat. All these names are in sticking with our tradition of naming characters based on the role they play. The original story had Buddhu attempting to be significantly more evil towards Chatur, rather than just having her do chores at home. That's it for now. Check out the links in the show notes for other Kashmiri folk tales. It's been a while since we did the Mahabharata, so we'll continue the story in the next episode. We'll do a couple more stories about the Pandav and Kaurav brothers growing up. If you have comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories that you would like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or tweet at sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. I'll see you next time.